everyone. So Lag BaOmer really commemorates two events, which makes it a joyous day, but for the fact that on this occasion it doesn't feel quite as joyous with the loss of life that occurred in Israel. And so the two reasons are, first of all, Rabbi Akiva and his students. Rabbi Akiva was an absolute revolutionary. He introduced an entirely new way of studying Torah, an analytical way of studying Torah that took the Jewish world by storm at the time. By the way, if you ever want to get a really good understanding of what happened at that time in a fascinating historical novel that took Israel by storm, you'll want to read this book over here called The Orchard by Yochi Brandes. Really fascinating. It's a historical novel, but tells you about Rabbi Akiva, the disciples who were with him, etc. Rabbi Akiva went through two stages in regard to his disciples. When he first started learning and came to prominence, people flocked to him, and he had 12,000 pairs of students, 24,000 students spread across the whole of Judea. Rabbi Akiva was living just around about the time after the destruction of the temple during the time of Roman persecution. And these students were studying, etc., but apparently a tremendous plague struck them, and during the period between Pesach and Shavuot, they all passed away. 24,000 young men, well, presumably young, 24,000 students. The reason that's given is because they did not show sufficient respect to each other in some way or another. The nature of any kind of study is that it breeds huge jealousy about others who are clever or less insightful or whatever. And whatever it is, the relationships between these students were not what they should have been. According to tradition, that's the reason why this plague struck. The Talmud says that they actually died a bad death. And one of the rabbis in the Talmud, Rabbi Nachman, asks, what was the nature of this bad death? How does it happen that 24,000 people die so quickly? Well, we used to ask these questions in wonder. We don't wonder about it so much anymore because we now understand more about plagues. The Talmud suggests that they died of diphtheria, and it just because they were all in close contact one with another, it spread through them like fire, and they all passed away. Rabbi Akiva then went on in his older age and developed another set of students, 5 students. These were the most influential students. They're the ones that are spoken about in this book, The Orchard. And it was through them that the whole Talmudic system that we have today was the foundations of the Talmudic of the system. The whole of the Mishnah was really around these five students, major personalities in Jewish history. One of them was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the 5 students. And that leads us to the second reason for the celebration on Lag BaOmer, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was not just a great halachas, but he was also a mystic. And he introduced to the world, he wrote the Zohar according to our tradition, and he introduced into the world the mystical teachings. And it is said that in the day of his death, he gathered his disciples around him, and he revealed profound, such deep secrets that it is as if people couldn't even look at him. It was as if the house was on fire. And that's the reason, by the way, why, number one, we celebrate in Meron, because that is where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried. And it's also the reason why we make bonfires, because to the light, the energy that he brought into the world in his teachings, the sense of the fire that filled his home in some kind of mystical sense, of course, not a real fire, etc. And to commemorate that is the reason why we light bonfires on Lag BaOmer.